So this is my fly pattern. Close up of it. I'm going to show you in a minute the actual chart to see what to do on some of these. But let's look at the wing section here. You can see that some of these stitches are angled. Some go straight down. There are some that have 2 posts and 1 stitch. So this stitch right here is an actual front loop double crochet 2 together. On the chart it'll show as an X2, and then other things on the chart will show a typical X, but it'll be angled out with a red arrow or a green arrow. The red arrows correspond to the A rows, and the green arrows correspond to the B rows. So, and there's a lot of angled stitches. You can see here, this goes straight down, that's angled, that's angled, that's angled. There are a lot of angled stitches, so this is it's going to take some counting and paying attention, and a couple angled stitches here. These are bobble stitches. You just probably want to look how to do a bobble stitch. They are basically double crochet bobble stitches. I did 4 double crochets in my bobble stitch, and you're doing that through both loops of the stitch that it's going into. More angled stitches here. And again, once you see the chart with all the arrows pointing everywhere, then it will make sense what I'm talking about. So yeah, just pay attention that some of these are going to be angled, some are straight down, some are front loop double crochet 2 together. Also, there are a lot of color changes in this square. Not that there's a lot of colors, but there's going to be a lot of color changes. If we look at the front, with the A rows, they're black, and then they'll change to this gray color or white, whichever color you want to make your wing. With these B rows, they change from the background color to a dark gray, which is basically a lighter version of black, but where the wing is over it, because I wanted to look like it was being partially masked by the wing, which wings are translucent, but there is a little bit of shading. So this gray is probably not dark enough. After I did it, I was like, I should have gone with a darker gray, but it's basically the black that is covered by the wing. And so you're going to want to switch to the gray wing color while you're in the A rows that start with black. You're going to want to switch to this gray color when you're in the B rows that start with whatever your background is. And when we get up here, we're going to switch to this green color during the B rows as well. This row is a little tricky because we start with background, switch to the dark gray that's under the wing, then we switch to green, or whatever your stripes are. Then we switch back to the dark gray, then we switch back to the background. So you're going to have 3 colors to deal with in this row. Up here, we're going to add red during the B row as well. And so if we look at the back, so sometimes I stitch over the beginning of the secondary color. Sometimes I would tie it. Sometimes I would just tie it to the previous row has this ridge of back loop single crochets. And so I would just tie it there. You know, it doesn't really matter how you secure the starting tail of that secondary yarn. You just want to have it ready to go when it's time to change over. And then you would carry the beginning color through the row as you go until you need it again on the other side. So really all the colors, we're doing the same thing. We're starting with our beginning color. We're picking up the secondary color a few stitches before we need it. And then we switch over to it. We use it during the stitching that we need it. We carry the other colors through. I do have another video about color switching that you can review. And then this is where I did the red bobbles. So yeah, that's it. Okay, so here is a little section of the chart for the housefly, and I just want to show some of these arrows close up and explain how they work, how I set them up on my pattern. So if you look closely at the chart, there are red arrows and there are green arrows. So the red arrows correspond to the A rows. The arrows respond to the A rows. Um, the green arrows correspond to the B rows. And as you go through the pattern, you'll see that any arrow that's from an A row stitch is going to be red. Any arrow that's from a B row stitch is green. Sometimes when you have your ruler over the row, you see these arrows coming down, but you don't know where they're coming from. So just remember, if you're in a B row, which is like the white rows, it's only the green arrows. If you see a red arrow, it's just passing through that cell. So don't worry about seeing red arrows while you're in the B rows. If you're in the A rows, and you'll see the red arrows correspond to the rows that are for the color A. And so you can ignore any green arrows that are passing through a cell there. The way I did this was, normally when you do a front loop double crochet, this stitch would drop down into the front loop of this stitch. And of course this stitch drops down into the front loop of this stitch. And they usually drop straight down. But because I wanted the wings to have a little more of a fly shape, I have them angled out. Some of them angled, some of them are not. So like this one here is going to angle into the front loop of this stitch, and it will angle to the right. This one with an X2 is basically a front loop double crochet 2 together. And that's my cat in the background. She needs to go to the vet very soon and get fixed. So this one, you're going to do the first post of that 2 together front loop double crochet into this square. The second post will go into this square. Some of these angled stitches are on top of a front loop double crochet from the previous row, so obviously there isn't usually a front loop to go into straight down. So when you get to this stitch, you'll kind of see that you can't go straight down like normal. But in this case, I want you to do 2 posts. So front loop double crochet 2 together. So you may want to go online to see how to do DC 2 together. It's the same exact process. You start the first post, you go into this loop, don't finish the stitch, you'll have 2 loops left on your hook, start another double crochet, go into this front loop, and then you finish the whole stitch. So basically at the top you'll have 1 stitch, but there'll be 2 posts. That's what these X2 squares mean, is front loop double crochet 2 together. Something like this, you may have a front loop down below to go into, but I don't want you to go straight down. In this case, I want you to follow the arrow and go into the previous front loop, which would have been underneath your previous back loop. When you do go backwards like that, you don't want to do your next back loop single crochet in this space. There will be an empty back loop behind this, just like there is normally when you do other front loop double crochets. But just make sure you're going into this back loop and not this back loop. So that's something to keep in mind when you do these angled stitches. Sometimes it's easy to get mixed up as far as what your next stitch is. So I hope that makes sense. Red arrows correspond to a stitch from your A rows. Green arrows correspond to the stitch from your B rows. And then these are the color changes. With these A rows, you're starting out with the main fly body color, which in my case was black. And then I had to switch to this color, which was a light gray. White would look good too, but whatever color you're going to use for your wings, you're going to want to switch during these back loop single crochets. Doesn't really matter which one, but as long as you switch before you get to this stitch, because this stitch you want to do in the wing color. And so then this area you'll do the wing color. When you get here, you're going to want to switch back to black at the very, very end of this stitch. When you have 2 loops left on your hook, grab the black. You will have brought your black through to the back or stitching over it through these stitches, and then just switch it back at the very, very end of the stitch so that you have black. And then on the other side, you'll have the other half of this, so you're going to do the same type of thing. Just pay attention to the red arrows, where they're pointing. So if the arrow's pointing out to the side and it's just 1 X, that's where you want to place that. You don't want to go straight down like normal. If you see an X2, then sometimes you'll want to go straight down. If you only see 1 arrow, where I have an X2, that means one of the posts is going to be straight down like normal, and the other post will be to wherever the arrow is going to be pointing. So I hope that makes sense. Again, this one with the purple, that is the part of the fly's body and legs that are underneath the wings. So I went with a gray color because the wings have a little bit of a translucence to them. So to me, I figured I don't want to go with the regular black. I wanted to go with a little bit lighter to show that there's a wing over it. That was my thought process. So probably a dark gray. You could do black if you want, but I think a dark gray looks better under this area, the wing area, just to kind of give that appearance of a wing being on top of this area. So yeah, you'll start with the background color. There is no hidden stitches between the background and the gray colors. I went with purple on the squares because I already used gray here, so I didn't want to confuse it. But these purples basically are like a dark gray. You start with the background color. You'll want to switch to the gray color here at the very end of this switch. Do what I call a clean switch. Do the stitch almost to completion. When you have 2 loops left on your hook, grab gray. Do the gray here. In this case, you're going to go to the arrow points to that stitch. So put your front loop double crochet into this front loop, not this one, obviously. Then switch back to the background here. Remember, when they're white, that's the actual background color. You want that color to show through. If it's gray, it's going to be hidden by the next row. So the gray stitches aren't as critical what color you're using. And if you can transition between colors in gray stitches, great. This one you can. It's the background color. There's a transition area here. It's just gray. It means it's hidden by this stitch right here. This one doesn't have an arrow. It goes straight down. Same with this one. No arrow, so it goes straight down. You can transition from the background color to the gray in this stitch. Here's the gray area. The yarn color gray area, not the gray color squares. Anyway, I hope all these arrows make sense. Just pay a lot of attention. This is pretty complex pattern. I'm not gonna lie, it's not as easy as some of the other patterns, but just go one row at a time, go one stitch at a time. If it has an arrow, make sure you're stitching into that space, not straight down. If it doesn't have an arrow, like this one, stitch straight down. All these arrows are pointing to where you want to stitch. If it doesn't have an X2, that means it's just a regular front loop double crochet, but you're going to stitch where the arrow is. Like this one, you would normally stitch straight down if it was a normal stitch, but there is an arrow here. The top of the arrow is the stitch that's affected, and it's pointing to where you place the stitch. So yeah, just go row by row, one stitch at a time, and it'll make sense. It gets a little tricky, but again, if you lay your work flat and just kind of count where you're at, then hopefully it makes sense.